For this short presentation, I'm going to heavily reference Chapter 3 from Editing Canadian English, the 3rd edition. This chapter has a lot of really good information on the conventions of spelling for a Canadian audience. It talks a bit about some of the considerations that one should make. And at the end of the chapter, there's an excellent section of tables that shows the difference between variations in spelling between British Canadian and US English. So because Canada was a British colony, we have kept many of the British English spellings, but because we're close to the US, we have also adopted some American spellings. So that is something you need to be aware of as an editor. For the most part, if you are editing for a Canadian audience, you will want to adopt a Canadian spelling. Now, for the purpose of this class, we have chosen to reference the Canadian Oxford English Dictionary, 2nd edition. So prior to editing a document, you are going to want to choose a dictionary that you're going to use as a default resource. Now, there might be reasons that you will diverge from that particular resource, and that's okay as long as you've got a good reason for doing it. But you need that default resource so that you can maintain consistency throughout the document, and in some cases through an organization or a company's messaging in general. So here's an example of why you might want to vary or step away from your default spelling. Many years ago, I co-owned a small publishing company. We published various anthologies, and one of the anthologies that we published was a collection of stories written by Malawian schoolgirls. Now, Malawi used to be a British so-called protectorate. So that means that they have an influence from Britain, just like Canada does. Only they have evolved differently. Their language has evolved differently. They have some different spellings than we in Canada do. Now, when I was editing this collection of girls' stories, I realized that there were certain words that they spelled differently than we do. Some of these came from the British tradition. And I decided early on in this editing that I wanted to maintain their voice, the girl's voice, and I wanted to preserve their spelling of some of these words that derived from the British spelling, and that we wouldn't spell that way in Canada. Now, there were also separate chapters within this book that were written by Canadians, not by the girls who went to this school. They were explanatory chapters. But I wanted the spelling to be consistent throughout the entire document, so within those explanatory chapters, I did make the spelling consistent with the girls' spelling when there was overlap with these words. So that's an example of a deliberate choice by an editor to go outside of Canadian spelling for a Canadian publication. So even though the audience was Canadian, I chose to use Malawian spellings for some words in this publication. So once you've chosen a default dictionary, what you'll find is there are usually a number of variants for each word, or for many words, maybe not each word, but many words within a dictionary. You want to default to the first spelling, the first one that's listed under the word. In the case of the Canadian Oxford English Dictionary, the first spelling tends to be the more, quote, Canadian or the more common spelling. Now again, you might for some reason choose the second or even the third spelling instead, but make sure that you have a good reason for those exceptions and then make sure that you're being consistent. How are you going to be consistent? You're probably going to make note of these choices in a style sheet, which we'll talk about later. But in general, as the default, consider the first variant spelling the one that you would go with. Pay particular attention to words that have the OR or OUR ending, the ER or the RE ending, the IZE or the ISE ending, the L or the double L ending. These are really common suffixes that are have variance between British, Canadian, and US spelling. At the end of chapter 3, there's an excellent section that shows some of the variations, or a lot of the variations actually. I would suggest that you take a quick look at this. This will really help you down the road if you're not already aware of these variations in spelling. You will see immediately that the US adopts more of the OR endings, whereas Canada and Britain tend to go with the OUR ending. You'll also see that Canada and Britain tend to go with the RE ending, whereas the US tends to go with the ER ending. And there are all sorts of really interesting linguistic reasons and historical reasons for why this is. But, that's for another discussion, I think. But familiarize yourself with this content so that you can make informed decisions about these kinds of choices.